U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland made a surprise visit to Ukraine on Tuesday, meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart, Irina Vendiktova, to underscore the U.S. position in helping her government find and prosecute what he called war criminals on the Russian side from this now 110-day-old conflict. Meeting near the Polish border in the town of Krakowicz, Garland expressed, quote, the unwavering support of the United States and calling this conflict unjust and unprovoked. But are either of those assessments accurate? By now, most people are aware of the U.S. role in what is tantamount to a coup in Kiev back in 2014, when the likes of Senators Lindsey Graham and the late John McCain were there, working in tandem with Victoria Nuland, then the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. Now, given the U.S. role in Maidan and throughout the 20th century, the U.S. has a long history of what the international community has called war crimes, and is certainly not in the position to point any fingers, given America's foreign policy appears to be that of any action with full impunity. You can go as far back as the 1960s, when the U.S. blanketed the tiny Southeast Asian country of Laos with bombs, which averages out to nearly every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for nearly a full decade, killing thousands of innocent civilians, two of those my own immediate family members. Laos was never a party to the Vietnam War. This was a covert operation by the CIA, known now as the Secret War. More than half a century later, still no American has been prosecuted for these crimes. Or in more recent memory, a visceral one, the 2007 video depicting American Apache helicopter gunners shooting down and killing nearly a dozen Iraqi civilians, two of them Reuters reporters. Now, that video made infamous and iconic by WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, better known today as the collateral murder tapes. Now, among those severely injured, two Iraqi children as well. Still, no Americans prosecuted, but Assange is charged with espionage by the US DOJ. Or in 1999, during the Clinton years, a US-led NATO bombing campaign in the former Yugoslavia balkanized the region, killing thousands in that Eastern European country, including 3 Chinese citizens at the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during their 78-day campaign. More than a dozen other Chinese nationals were injured when NATO mistakenly targeted the embassy, thinking it was a Yugoslavian military procurement facility. Now, suffice it to say, China was not a party to that conflict. Or in 2017, as the US and coalition forces ramped up their campaign against ISIS in Raqqa, Syria, the so-called capital of the caliphate, the city of some 300,000 residents was decimated by Western bombs. A 2018 report by Amnesty International outlines the tens of thousands of coalition strikes on Raqqa, with admission by the West to unleashing some 30,000 artillery rounds, the U.S. operating 90% of the airstrikes between June 6th to October 17th of that year alone. Amnesty International says this in their report, quote, the coalition strikes detailed in the report are examples of wider patterns. There is strong evidence that coalition air and artillery strikes killed and injured thousands of civilians, including in disproportionate or indiscriminate attacks that violated international human law and are potential war crimes. The human rights group later reached out to the Pentagon to no avail, no American facing any charges for issuing those orders. And in echoing Amnesty International, a wider pattern is clearly established that the U.S. consistently takes lethal action against civilians as common practice and does so without accountability or consequence. In fact, some might say with contempt and the goal of obfuscating the truth in their actions. This is evidenced by the 2020 action taken by then-President Donald Trump, when he executed an executive order effectively sanctioning members of the International Criminal Court. Trump sought to stop the investigation into the U.S. actions in Afghanistan and to protect Israeli officials for their human rights violations against Palestinians. He took punitive measures like sanctioning ICC judges and other officials, revoking their visas to the US, even threatening their personal foreign financial assets as a coercive measure to dissuade those officials from investigating 20 years worth of atrocities in Afghanistan. So, with the abundance of evidence of US war crimes across the globe throughout the 20th century, is it at all reasonable for the US Attorney General to call the actions of any other country a war crime when the US has evaded justice for at least a century? The hypocrisy is bipartisan here in the US Capitol. In Washington, Manila Chan.